Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. And joining us tonight, Jason Burt, Chief Football Correspondent of The Telegraph, and Miguel Delaney, The Independent's Chief Football Writer. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run through the back page headlines. The Star, Erik gets a run over is the headline. That's the Sun, the pot shots of Ronaldo over Erik ten Hag, and also definitely City. Manchester City and Pep recreating Oasis's famous album cover there. Mail back page carries quotes from Lee Carsley, who says he's up for it when asked about the England job full-time. Paper reports the FA have had conversations with other managers. Also, Cristiano Ronaldo's criticisms of Ten Hag on the side there. Front page of the Telegraph Sports Supplement. Gareth Southgate's future is there, making it. The revelation his next job could be outside football itself. Paper reflects England's heavy defeat to Australia in the first T20 at Southampton, and Ronaldo in the fresh dig at Ten Hag. And Sky Sports News as well be covering our exclusive interview with John Textor, who says succeeding Farhad Moshiri as Everton owner would be like becoming US president. Well, let's start with Manchester United. Their insistence that they'll be PSR compliant despite another significant loss, this time £113 million in their latest accounts. And the Sun Web, we'll get to the back page in a second, but covering this, debt mounting, why Manchester United are confident they won't break PSR rules despite announcing £113 million loss last season. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, apparently, according to the Sun here, Miguel has committed himself to a £230 million cash injection by the end of the year. How startling were these numbers, Miguel, when they came out in terms of the expenditure?
Maybe not actually that striking, given, I suppose, the amount of upheaval. Well, not upheaval's perhaps the wrong word, but given the fact there's been a change of minority ownership with Ratcliffe's own stake, which has factored in to the figures. Now, the one thing to remember, because I know obviously, given how much PSR and financial regulations now animates a lot of discussion about football, almost more than the results themselves, given they do have an influence. But obviously there's a lot of talk about whether United will fail. I suppose one thing in this that's important to remember is that there are costs here that aren't necessarily factored in to PSR, stuff like investment in infrastructure, the women's team. So I think that's where United's confidence comes from. But I think just even in looking at some of the details today, one thing that struck me, especially mentioning Ratcliffe in that regard and his promise in terms of putting money into the club, but it's almost a tragic irony, especially what's happened to Manchester United over 2 decades with the ownership and everything the ownership is represented with a leveraged buyout. I mean, part of the initial or the original idea behind the PSO rules was to make clubs self-sustainable. And so they weren't dependent on owner funding that could be erratic. That was a key thing because clubs were going out of business if money was pulled away. Yet with United, who a lot of people would say is England or Europe's one of the greatest clubs, this has been a case where costs have actually been loaded onto the club. And it's one of those situations where suddenly I saw it and I think the kind of situation that football has got itself into, and even illustrated by the fact on the top of a sports news show, we are talking about accounting principles.
Absolutely. We're all trying to do our calculations as well and make sense of the numbers, Jason. The back page of the Sun Sport as well has a headline, United at a loss. And they mention here as well, £257.4 million, Jason, over the past 3 years. That loss, $650 million still leveraged against the club. Miguel's got an interesting point there, hasn't it? They probably don't need an owner of any account. They're such a money-making club, but they're very much laden with outgoings.
Well, yes. I mean, Manchester United is the great cash cow of English football. It generates a huge income. That's obviously the attraction. Partly with something like Jim Ratcliffe getting involved in it. But actually, I think they are sailing fairly close to the wind now with these set of figures. They're very confident they will comply with PSR, but there's an awful lot of deductions to be factored into that. And even then, I think it takes them reasonably close to the cumulative figure of £105 million in losses over a 3-year period. So I think they're a little bit close to that. As I say, they're briefing today and saying they're very confident they will not breach PSR rules. And just to follow on from Miguel's point, I mean, talking about loading the club with debts, I mean, one of the big deductions that's going to be added in to take away from that total is the £47 million worth of fees involved in the takeover or the partial takeover by Sir Jim Ratcliffe. I mean, I maybe I'm naive, but I'm not quite sure why Manchester United should be taking that figure on as a club. Why can't the individuals involved be paying for their own legal costs and so on and so forth? But actually, the fundamental point is, as you say, United do generate an awful lot of cash. These are big figures. It does look quite scary at times, but actually, in terms of what they will be able to produce in the accounts at the right time for the Premier League, I think they probably will comply with PSR, and they will show that they are generating enough cash to do so.
OK, we'll be across that situation with United then as the accounts come out and PSR considerations. Meanwhile, Ronaldo has been having something to say about Erik ten Hag's ambition or lack of it. Erik's got it all wrong, and the Mirror is the headline. Cristiano puts boot into ten Hag over negative title talk at United. The Star says that Cristiano reignites Old Trafford. Erik gets run over. United icon puts boot into ten Hag over negative Prem title talk. The Sun back page has more bad news for Red Devils. It has that financial story we've touched upon. And then pot shot, Ronaldo's raps Erik's attitude to winning big titles. Miguel's been speaking to his friend Rio Ferdinand, one of his former teammates he's still on good terms with. What did you make of this? Has Ronaldo got some good points to say about what Ten Hag's had to say, or is it personal bitterness?
A bit of both, possibly. And I suppose how receptive the audience is interesting, given, I suppose, maybe perceptions have shifted about Ten Hag as well. I think when Ten Hag initially made the decision to get rid of Ronaldo, and he did that round of interviews then famously, or infamously maybe, there was a lot of sympathy for Ten Hag's position. I did think he handled it well. In the time since, maybe you'd say even the time since the League Cup that shortly followed that, there's obviously been this huge debate about Ten Hag himself. And this kind of almost touches on a bit of a culture war within the club, especially given on one side, the FA Cup win has led to a situation where a lot of United fans are backing Ten Hag against external criticism, even if they themselves have debate his suitability. But now on the other side of that, of course, is regardless of how it ended for Ronaldo at Old Trafford, he's still one of the greatest figures in the club's history. There's still hero worship there. So it's a difficult position for fans, given this is ultimately what a concern, or who it concerns really. As regards the kind of content of the words, I have to say if I was to criticise Ten Hag, and I think there's grounds for criticism, I don't think what Ronaldo has actually singled out here is all that relevant. I think there's other issues you can criticise for Ten Hag for. Issues like the kind of, the ambition he has to show as United manager. Well, actually, United were a club that could have done with some realism when Ten Hag came in.
On the subject of realism, this is what Ronaldo said, Jason, in the back page of the Mail, quoted here. Ronaldo's new blast at his old foe, Ten Hag. He says, Manchester United need to rebuild everything. He says, the coach says they cannot compete to win the Premier League and Champions League. You can mentally say we don't have that potential, but you cannot say that. Is that an important opinion about the framing that Ten Hag has at United, given the history and indeed the money that we've seen that's been spent at the club?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point to make. I mean, I think obviously part of the criticism of Ten Hag will be this: what he has said basically is what you would say in year one, not in year three. But I guess his argument would be, actually, this is year one because it's the first year since Jim Ratcliffe came in, and since obviously the kind of restructuring of the club has happened. So he's looking at it and saying, well, the past 2 years, I've had to deal with this situation where the club was badly organised, they didn't have the support I needed, and so on and so forth. So in some sense, he's right. He makes sense in what he's saying. But I think Ronaldo's also right in that a club like Manchester United, and especially with the expenditure they've had in the transfer market in the last 3 years under Ten Hag, and especially the fact that this is his third season, he can't really say that sort of stuff out loud. In saying all of that, at the same time, one of Ronaldo's big complaints when he was at Manchester United was how bad the training ground was and how nothing had changed at the training ground. And actually then he's saying, well, this will take time, the infrastructure needs to change. And to be fair to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, that is one thing he is doing. He is invested in the training ground, so that will take time. So there's a slight contradiction in what Ronaldo is saying, but then basically it boils down to he thinks Erik ten Hag shouldn't be saying publicly what he's saying and should keep it to himself. And obviously it's fundamentally to do with the kind of the bad blood between them in terms of the way it ended at United.
Everyone has an opinion. I certainly subtext here was that Ronaldo definitely seems to still care about Manchester United. Talking about caring, John Textor seems to really care about Everton Football Club. Exclusive interview with Sky Sports News. Alan Myers covered on our website. John Textor exclusive. American businessman says succeeding Farhad Moshiri as Everton owner would be like becoming US president. What do you make of that analogy, Miguel?
Typical of maybe some of Textor's public comments. He's an interesting character in that regard. He's certainly been willing to make some outlandish public comments in some of his other ownerships, like in Brazil. Obviously, there's a much bigger situation here than John Textor, which is basically the future of Everton Football Club, which I think is, I mean, given the fact they kind of obviously consistently play in the Premier League every week, it sometimes can obscure just how perilous things are and how much this is a club in need of some sort of financial saviour. And from that perspective, it's almost beyond whether John Textor would be a good owner or a right owner, because it comes down to just having someone solid with some sustainable money in place. And I mean, even hanging over all of this is like one of the discussions here about whether it would be better for any potential buyer to wait for Everton to go into receivership, even that would potentially mean a points deduction that leads to relegation. There's so many swirling strands to this. But yeah, given wording like that, Textor is obviously positioning himself as, well, I mean, so you talk about US president. We are kind of getting into saviour dynamics then.
Yeah, I'm not sure about which job's most stressful. We didn't get into that with him, unfortunately. Jason, what about the Crystal Palace perspective here? Because Textor seems to be keen on a marriage with Everton, but he needs a divorce from Palace first, doesn't he? What do you think their fans will make of these comments?
I think they will hope he just sells his shares and goes, basically. I don't think he's been somebody that massively welcomed at Crystal Palace. I think it's been a very, very frustrating investment for him. You know, I think he owns it. I think it's at 45%, but he's not got a huge amount of say in the running of the club. Obviously, Steve Parish has kept control of that, and obviously there's David Blitzer and Josh Harris as well. So I think that's been a very frustrating period of time for him. He's tried to take control of the club and not been able to do so. So obviously now he's looked at pastures new. So he has to divest himself of that shareholding. I think he says there's a couple of parties that he's talking to, and that should happen. Obviously, then to free up the money as well to invest in Everton. I mean, I thought the interview was very good knockabout stuff as well. There's a nice dig at Tottenham Hotspur's new stadium, talking about how it's like sort of a conference centre or whatever. And also, I think there was the line saying he doesn't want Everton bouncing around 8th place. I think most Everton fans will say, well, we'll definitely take 8th place at the moment. I mean, I think last time they bounced around 8th place was quite some time ago. He's quite a colourful character, John Textor. He's not afraid to say a few things. His ownership record is a bit patchy, it's got to be said. But I think it'll be quite interesting if he gets control of Everton and obviously if he's going to be talking like this to see what he does with the club.
Okay, he's had some interesting things to say about Sean Dyche as well, Miguel. What do you think about this? He says, I like that he's brought the big, tough Irish kid, Jake O'Brien, but does he like Botafogo forwards Igor Jesus or Luis Enrique? Does he have an ambition to coach that sort of profile? Is this a bizarre pressure on Sean Dyche to start researching South American football?
I mean, if you're Sean Dyche, I suppose alarms are ringing in terms of a bigger potential future boss is talking about potential recruitment, but beyond that, whether your management is in sync with the new or potential new owners' idea of recruitment, because there's almost two levels to that. So yeah, if you're Sean Dyche, and we know Dyche himself isn't afraid to be strident in his own views in public, that first meeting with Textor, if the takeover does happen, you wouldn't mind that in public, basically.
Well, the Sean Dyche press conference tomorrow, but some interesting questions. I'm sure maybe Alan Myers, who conducted the interview, John Textor, might be there or get some questions in anyway. Miguel and Jason, thank you very much for now. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will look at more of the back pages, including this in the Mail. I'm up for it, says Lee Carsley. But is the England job full-time still up for grabs? We'll discuss that. Welcome back to You're Watching Back Pages tonight, and it's welcome back to Jason Burt, Chief Football Correspondent at The Telegraph, and Miguel Delaney, The Independent's Chief Football Writer. Let's go to that story on the back page of the Mail. Jason, I'll come to you. I'm up for it. Carsley keen on top job, but FA talking to other bosses. Sammy Mockbell with the story. What percentage would you give Carsley in terms of a chance of getting the job? We'll get to the other names on the shortlist in just a second.
Wow, that's a curveball, isn't it? Percentage, I would say 70%, 80%. I think he's got a really good chance to get in the job. I think this is an opportunity for the FA to promote from within. I think John McDermott, the FA's technical director, is running the process, and I think he sees Carsley as his man, really, to come in and do the job. It's been very noticeable to me that both in Dublin and at Wembley in the last couple of games, John McDermott's been visible close to Lee Carsley at the final whistle. And it makes sense. Obviously, it shows the pathway through from the under-21s to the senior job, as happened with Gareth Southgate. And let's be honest, also, it's an awful lot cheaper than going out into the market and hiring a manager. However, in saying all of that, the FA absolutely have to run a process. They absolutely have to talk to other managers. The invited applications for this job. Interestingly, Carsley hasn't applied for the job. I asked him directly about that, and he said he didn't feel he needed to apply for the job, which I thought was quite interesting. I thought he really should apply for it. But invited applications, and they've got to go through those applications. And I think it's absolutely right. I mean, there could be an outstanding candidate out there who could blow their socks off and be the right man to take over. And I think it has to be quite transparent in that process in terms of talking to various people. I think they should interview Lee Carsley personally, but I don't think they're planning to do so. But to answer your question, I think he is the clear favourite, and probably understandably so, but I think they do absolutely need to speak to other people.
I like the 70-30 number. Let's consider some of the other candidates. Miguel, quickly in Sammy Mockbell's piece here, he says that Eddie Howe, former Chelsea boss, Graham Potter among those on the FA's shortlist. Foreign candidates include Jurgen Klopp, who's not believed to be interested in the role, Pep Guardiola and Thomas Tuchel. If not Carsley, who would you make as the favourite?
I think, well, I wouldn't make him the favourite because there's two more variables. But if it's not Carsley, I think the one they should obviously make a massive pitch for is Pep Guardiola, especially given, there is uncertainty over whether he will continue at City past this summer. While he has taken sabbaticals before, like after Barcelona, he might consider international football a different type of challenge that doesn't involve the same intensity. And also, it might appeal to him to be the manager, because Guardiola does like records, but to be the manager who kind of breaks England's long drought and wins a trophy. But I think there's so many variables to there, so I wouldn't consider him kind of anything close to a strong contender at the moment. That's, I think, maybe something fanciful or ambitious the FA should at least consider. And I'm told they are, but appreciate it's a long shot. And then beyond that, I mean, Potter was someone who was mentioned a lot when Southgate lost the job, or sorry, Southgate left the job, I should say. And someone who felt like he kind of fitted in with that maybe evolution the FA would want. But I agree with Jason there. I think it's, I think given what the FA have tried to do over 15 years, it would speak much more to their vision and what I do think this is important, what they want to say about English football, what they want English football to be, for Carsley to make that step up. And there's been obvious comparisons so far with, say, what Spain have done with De La Fuente and numerous youth coaches before that. And a lot of major nations now do that. Tying in with all of that, I think on the pitch, it's been very impressive from Carsley so far. Yeah, fair enough, okay, very modest opponent so far, but still, you can see the ideas. And while Carsley himself wouldn't say this is an interview in addition for the job, I think many other people might use exactly those words about this Nations League campaign. I
think they might. And let's have some of Carsley's quotes as well, Jason, covered in The Guardian and The Times. Guardian says, "I've shown I can do it." Buoyant Carsley dismisses talk of the impossible job. And a similar theme on the back page of The Times with Paul Joyce's piece headlined, "It's not an impossible job." Carsley positive about role of England head coach and says players are good enough to win major trophies. I suppose that's self-evident, Jason, as they've been to two finals recently. But what have you made of the way that Carsley's conducted himself and the way he's, I suppose, been quick not to say anything too sensational?
No, I think to be fair to Lee Carsley, he's very much going to be his own man, and he should be. If he wants to be authentic and do the job in the way that he thinks it should be done, then that's key to it. Obviously, he's talked about being, for example, a track-suited head coach rather than a suited manager. And that's interesting in itself. He was out laying the cones and putting the balls out before kick-off at both the games. And he's very much, sort of that coaching role is what he sees as his strength and what he wants to do. Clearly, one of the things he's not used to is the exposure and some of the things that go along with that. And that's going to be something that he's going to have to learn very, very quickly, while at the same time being true to himself. He has seemed to me over the last few days to have gained a bit of confidence. He seems a little bit less nervous than we first met him when he obviously did the squad announcement and talked about that then, and kind of really shied away from the possibility of actually being England's full-time manager. I think he's enjoyed the experience so far. Obviously, the performances have been encouraging, and I think he is growing into it. And I think the biggest aspect he probably struggles with is talking to the media, and that's probably partly through lack of experience of doing so. And he's growing into that as well. And I think he's talked strongly about how he sees the job developing in terms of the football. Obviously, there are other issues as well that he needs to deal with, but at the moment, I think he's handling it reasonably well.
Indeed, maybe at B level in the Nations League, it's a soft landing for him in terms of the opposition, Miguel. Let's talk about his predecessor, Gareth Southgate. In the Telegraph Sport front page, their supplement, Southgate says next job could be outside of football. Mike McGrath reporting. How intrigued were you by this revelation from the former England manager?
Very, and maybe not all that surprised either, given Southgate's always a quite a wide hinterland in that sense. Also, obviously, there's a real undercurrent here in Manchester United's maybe the interest of some of their hierarchy, because while I suppose it had been seen that, given there's all this talk, Southgate's on WhatsApp groups with people like Dan Ashworth, he's very into this high performance culture that Ashworth and Brailsford would promote. And while it was maybe seen that would kind of make Southgate a natural appointment for United if Ten Hag does leave, maybe it goes the opposite way, whereas that sort of connection influences Southgate in actually expanding his horizons and going into something else. Given how much as well he promoted the idea of high performance culture around England.
Very interesting to watch that as well. We've got about 20 seconds. I want to ask you about Martin Odegaard, set to miss Spurs and Manchester City games with ankle injury. This in the Guardian online. How key could that be? How detrimental for Arsenal, given his statistics? As I say, about 15 seconds.
It's potentially a massive blow. I mean, one of the things that's happened the last couple of years is Arsenal haven't actually had that many injuries, really, especially to key players. So this is a real test for them, obviously, with Declan Rice also suspended. So to see how they go into the North London derby. And I think this next week is actually crucial for them. They've got Tottenham, they've got Atalanta in the Champions League, and then they've got Manchester City. And they could end up 5 or 6 or 7 points behind City at the end of all those games. So it's a massive blow to lose out, and how they can cope without him.
Jason, Miguel, thank you very much for now. Brilliant show as ever. Thanks for watching.